We already know that high industry barriers discourage new competitors, which, in turn, can lead to greater pricing power. But what is pricing power in the first place? Let's put it this way. When you, as a business owner, ask yourself, how much pricing power do I have? It's the same as asking, how much can I raise the price of my products before customers get upset? That's why we say that it refers to the ability to raise the price without reducing demand in your products. Sounds familiar? That's right. For those of you who paid attention in your economics class, it's no surprise that it's closely related to the concept of price elasticity. The latter quantifies how much the demand for a product changes when the price is either increased or decreased. Naturally, the more pricing power you have, the easier it is to raise prices. You can imagine that pricing power is somewhat easier to achieve when entry barriers are high, because existing companies can earn higher profits without worrying that new competitors will eat their lunch. This is what happens with the global credit card networks Visa and MasterCard. The two companies often generate more than 40% net margins. You would think that such high profits attract competition. Nevertheless, the industry barriers are extremely high. Immense capital outflows for building a massive data processing network is one hurdle. We should also consider brand awareness. The universally recognized branding fortifies the two firms' positions. Okay. Imagine you are a rich venture capitalist willing to spend billions of dollars in replicating the physical infrastructure of the two market leaders. Even if you are successful in doing so, you are still miles away from being a real competitor. First, you have to persuade thousands of merchants around the globe to accept your card. And second, you need to convince millions of customers to start using it. These are major concerns, aren't they? Now you know why strong barriers often lead to better profitability of the incumbent players. Looking from a different perspective, when new competitors are able to easily overcome the existing entry barriers, the industry is considered highly competitive. As a result, the pricing power of incumbents is significantly reduced. A typical example can be the restaurant industry. Anyone can open a new place to eat, right? You need two ingredients: a modest capital investment and some culinary skills. Being relatively easy to join the F&B field, the industry has become highly competitive to survive once you are in. Many restaurants fail in the first few years of launching. What's the moral of the story? We should never confuse barriers to entry with barriers to success. Allow us to look into an example. Okay, in the US, it takes $150,000 to start a mutual fund. You may think at first, well, that's not a large initial investment for an industry that generates notoriously high profits. But at the same time, spending this money does not ensure that you will be successful. You still need to figure out a way to attract assets. And clients are unlikely to invest in a mutual fund with no track record, right? After you win a few good-hearted customers along with spending a lot on operational expenses, you will then be competing against other firms with enormous advertising budgets such as BlackRock, the Vanguard Group, and Charles Schwab Corporation. Surely you can keep up with these. All right. Having said that, let's evaluate how difficult it is to enter an industry from a more practical stand. One way of doing it is to simply ask yourself, what would it take for a new player to compete in the industry? How much capital do they need to provide? Is there a need for acquiring any intellectual property? And how hard is it to build a client base? An alternative method would be to examine industry composition over time. If the same companies have been dominating the industry for a long period, barriers to entry are probably high. And vice versa, if there are waves of newcomers over the past years, the entry is likely to be easy. Of course, we should be aware that entry barriers change as time passes. For example, up until the mid-90s, the chip-making industry was largely dominated by a few players, such as Intel, because of the high initial investments and their technological know-how. Nowadays, however, more and more competitors can enter the industry. This is largely due to the technological boom which allowed other nations, such as China, to close the gap. In practice, it's not always true that high barriers to entry imply high pricing power. Consider two industries, the airline and automaking. To begin with, you need substantial capital outflows for hardware. On top of that, you have to obtain regulatory permits and invest in intellectual property and many more. These are high hurdles. Still, the companies that operate in the two industries have no pricing power. What could be the reason for this paradox? Take the airline industry first. As we know, the two big players that compete for market share are Boeing and Airbus, and they offer substitute products with similar qualities. Most airlines that buy from the two producers consider the model price as a primary decision push, among other factors. That's because airlines have a limited ability to pass along higher costs to customers. So for example, if Boeing 777 costs $440 million, An Airbus A350 only $320 million. Other things equal, most airlines will opt for the cheaper option. Alright, sensitivity of demand to price is only one determinant for the lower pricing power. The second one deals with the high barriers to exit. That's the inability to switch production to another product. This often leads to industry overcapacity and intense price competition. Think of it as climbing a mountain. It's hard to reach the peak, but once you do it, it's just as tough to go back. It's difficult for Ford to use its automobile plants for anything else other than producing cars. That's why the company continues to operate even when the demand is low. Such firms usually have high fixed costs. To make up for the increased operating leverage, Ford needs to produce more cars. Having a lot of ready-to-sell vehicles in store brings about another challenge. That is finding many more clients willing to purchase your stock. Because of this, business owners often cut prices as a strategic way to boost the number of buyers. Excellent. We've covered some ground.